Hello! So today we're going to be looking at this JMP rig that I've been using for a while for session work and for practice at home. I've recently just swapped out my Palmer Macht 402 and popped in this EL84 2020, so we can go over that too. That is a tube power amp rather than the Palmer, which was a solid state power amp. The JMP-1 preamp, of course, which we've gone through in previous videos, and also the TC Electronics G Major 1. I recently had the 2, had some issues with it, the ribbon cables and stuff like that, so I've been more happy with the 1 in terms of reliability. So first things first, we'll look at how I'm running everything. So it's guitar straight into a Boss EQ pedal, no wireless in this setup, just going full cable. Straight out of the Boss into the input of the Marshal JMP-1 preamp, and then in the loop I'm running the TC Electronics G Major, so it's a mono out from the JMP into the TC Electronics, which then breaks out into a stereo feed. That's then running back into the JMP, so that you can blend the volume, the mix of the effects. Using the effects button, press that, and then you can turn up the volume to 12, which is full, which is the wet mix, and then down to 0, which is a dry mix. On the JMP-1, from left to right, we've got volume, gain, bass, middle, treble, presence, and effect, overdrive 1, overdrive 2, bass shifts, clean 1, clean 2, your MIDI map, and your channel. We've got data knob, we've got patch and store, so that's a patch recall, and that's the store button. Your output level is your preamp output volume, and then headphones and input jack, and of course your power button. We won't cover the TC Electronics, but basically it is a guitar effects unit. It's like a bunch of pedals, but in a kind of 1U racks DSP run. It has a lot of cool features, including like a noise gate, compression, filter, blah blah blah, but we don't need to go through that today. We'll kind of be covering the sounds and the features of the JMP-1 and the EL84 together. So the EL84 is a 1U power amp. It gets pretty hot. Make sure it's well ventilated. I've got a bit of space under here. It's got a master volume, and it has a presence knob and a deep button, which is sort of deepens the bass. It's quite cool for 90s stuff, which is kind of when this amp came out. It was a bit late in terms of rack preamps. You know, they had your ADAs and stuff like that, and your tri-axis and stuff. This was a bit later on. Still cool, but maybe a bit late to the games in terms of the retro rack gear. Even though the 90s still had some cool rack setups, back in the day, Iron Maiden toured with it, Smashing Pumpkins, Blink-182. I think the coolest thing about this setup is the fact that it's 1U. It's 1U, 1U, 1U. Effects, preamp, and power amp with 20 watts per side out of quite a small pack. Got this Gator case, and I'm running stereo, so 2 stereos out of the power amp. One thing to note about the EL84 is you have to run stereo. There's only one knob here, so you can't have one channel off, not running any power. You need to have a load on both sides, and you need to have them plugged in. So I'm running 16 ohm stereo out of the back of the EL84. Something that's not often talked about, and I think it's important to remember that you need to have a load on both sides just for safety and all that sort of stuff. So we'll run through some tones. We'll start out with some heavy stuff, go straight into it with some high gain tones, and then we'll work sort of our way back to the clean stuff at the end. I am running a little bit of compression. So that was a pretty good example of a high gain tone out of the JMP. The gain was up at 20 there. So we'll move along and kind of bring the gain down to about 16 and do a bit more playing around with the EQ and see what we can get. So that was a sort of high gain solo tone I use, the sort of rock fusion side of things. We'll pull it back to something more bluesy, a bit more mellow. We'll pull the gain down a bit and we'll move it over to overdrive 2. So here's some tones. Yes, that's the sort of mid-range gain back on the OD1. So let's take it right down to some clean tones, which I am running chorus and delay on. I'll take those off because we are miking this in mono, but I'll add some stuff in post effects to give you an idea of the kind of sparkle you can get out of the clean section of this amp. So yeah, it's clean 2 I'm using for this one. So there's some of the tones that I'm using live with the JMP. Obviously this is mic'd with a SM57 in front of a vintage 30 in a 2x12. So obviously everyone's tone will be a bit different based on the speakers and the mic setup, but this is a fairly common setup, so hopefully I can give you an idea of what that sounds like. So there's a few things that the JMP really benefits from to get the most out of it, and I think that running a EQ pedal in the front is a really quick and easy way of just taking out frequencies that are maybe a bit harsh and unpleasant. It also is really handy if you're using a single coil guitar. You can use the gain, master gain, as basically a clean boost. I use that quite a lot if I'm doing a solo and I need a little bit more with the single coil guitar. Then I can use that as basically a clean boost pedal. The JMP is quite an interesting preamp because it was sold as a valve preamp. However, it's not a true traditional valve pre-stage. It still sounds great. It's not necessarily a bad thing. The power amp is full valve, and often what I found using the Class D style solid state amps is it just sounds a bit cold, and the JMP really comes to life when it's paired with a good power amp, in this case the EL84, which is sold to be paired with the JMP. There is the larger 3U version. Iron Maiden used that for years on the tour, seemed to have pretty good success with reliability. If you're looking for a kind of modular setup like this where it's racked based and you can swap things out and change the wiring, and this is a really good setup. It's retro, but it's reliable, if that's allowed to be said. And it looks a lot cooler on stage than my stuffy 6U Axe Effects wireless box of the IEM. I think this looks a lot nicer on stage, and it's cool to just plug in straight into the front of the amp and just go. No faff with wireless, no faff with like delay latency, none of that. So yeah, JMP-1 and the EL84 2020 and the TC Electronics G Major.